Great. So we're about to start a Google Hangout about millennials and kind of things that they're interested in, what topics are important to them, things like that. So I think we're just kind of waiting for everybody to get on the line. Like kind of the basics, like introduce yourself, where you're from, where you went to school, that kind of stuff, where you are now.
Well, my name is Robert Elliott. I'm from Houston, Texas. I attended school at Oklahoma State University. I got 2 bachelor's degrees, one in electrical engineering and another in computer engineering, and I'm getting a master's in computer engineering.
Cool. And so I guess kind of first, most basic question, are you planning on voting next week?
Yeah.
And are you going to be doing, so you're going to school in Oklahoma, so are you doing absentee ballot, or are you going to be voting in person?
No, I'm registered in Oklahoma.
Oh, okay. And what else I was going to, okay, so kind of another super basic question, but do you often like kind of keep up with and pay attention to politics, and how do you do that? What sites do you use? What kinds of things do you do to keep up with politics?
Mostly through the internet. I usually let Google's headlines, show me what's up.
Okay, cool. Do the 2 newcomers want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, where you go to school, or where you graduated from, and where you live from?
Well, I guess I'll start. I'm from South Carolina originally, but I go to college in Pennsylvania, Dickinson College. I'm a political science major. So, yeah, there we go.
And are you originally from South Carolina, or?
I am, yeah. Born and raised.
Cool. And I guess Adam?
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. Hi, I'm Adam. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. However, kind of a funny story, after I graduated high school, I moved up to Newton, Massachusetts with my family because of my dad's job, which is right outside of Boston. And then I went to the University of Chicago, which I just graduated from. So now I'm back in Newton. And I was a political science major, and yes. Any other questions or anything else I should say?
I mean, that's a good start. And then the question I was asking Robert was, so for everybody else, do you plan to vote? And I guess for both of you, you're able to vote kind of in person fine if you're doing that. So I know some of the people that are joining the call later would probably have to do absentee. So, yeah, are you planning to vote?
Adam, if you want to go, that's fine.
Thank you. Yes, I am planning on voting. In person on election day. I mean, during the primary, this is the first year Massachusetts just implemented early voting, but it's basically the same as absentee ballot, as like filling out an absentee, just only there in person. But I did that during the primary. However, I will be planning on voting in November. Do you also want me to answer the same question about like what I do to keep up with politics, or?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, usually I use a variety of sources. Usually I'll look at like Political Wire or Washington Post, Vox. That's Ezra Klein's newspaper, as well as various other sites. I mean, sometimes like I'll glance over the Huffington Post as well. Usually I don't really have the time to like sit down and actually like watch or listen to watch something on TV or listen to something on the radio. So it's usually mostly, looking at the internet in whatever time that I have. It's sort of much easier to control my time when it comes to following politics, at least in that regard.
And so, yeah, if you also want to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I plan on doing absentee. I'll be in Pennsylvania for the election, so I won't be able to vote in person, but I definitely plan on doing absentee. I actually get most of my information through Twitter by following, by following all like the the major newspapers and networks and so forth. So if I have time, I'll actually sit down and watch the NBC News.
And
Yeah.
sorry if I may chime in.
Yeah.
I'm kind of, I guess, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I will admit that in addition to the internet, I get much of my information, at least some of my information about politics from The Daily Show and then Colbert, as well as John Oliver's new show.
That is perfectly acceptable.
I think a lot of people use it. I'm surprised by how many people kind of our age say that they get a large portion of their news from Daily Show or from Colbert. I think you'll normally kind of like hear about something from that, and then you'll kind of like go look up the real news online afterwards. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've heard from some people.
Yeah, it's like, I guess from talking to some of my friends who also do the same, do the same thing. They are like, well, I don't know, like, because like they're not coming from I guess their job, at least as sort of comic news journalists, is like just sort of like point out the flaws or like sort of speak truth to power, so to speak. They're kind of viewed as somewhat more trustworthy. Like, I'm not speaking for myself, I'm speaking for like most of my other friends who do follow those same programs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I guess this is kind of a question, so for all three of you guys, related to that. So one of the questions the polls asked people was what types of social media they use the most. And this was kind of a question sort of serving political campaigns so they could see how to best reach out to people our age. And so one of the things I was interested in was if any of you guys have been kind of contacted or approached, or in any way, like, have you noticed campaign stuff on your social media aside from, friends posting news articles or something related to politics? Have you kind of seen any of that stuff on like Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook? Do you think that's a thing that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll see the people will do like a sponsored tweet or something, and it's not usually someone you follow. It's just kind of there. I think Facebook does the same thing, like an ad, I guess.
Do you normally pay attention to those? Like if you see like campaign stuff on like Facebook or Twitter or something, if it's somebody that you're kind of interested in, will you click on it, or do you just kind of ignore it?
If it's not from someone I follow, I don't usually pay attention because I know it's just kind of they paid to put an advertisement there. But I guess sometimes if it catches my eye, I'll click on it.
What about you guys?
I don't use Twitter, so I don't ever see tweets.
Fair.
I mean, I seldom use Twitter, but like often on Facebook or YouTube, I'll get, I guess, like based on like maybe past searches or background information that they have, it's like I'll see like maybe targeted web ads. Though often it's, I don't know, often like that method can be very imprecise. For example, I'm I consider myself a Democrat. I worked for Elizabeth Warren back in 2012, as well as one of Martha Coakley's primary opponents, Steve Grossman. Yet I'm getting all these web ads for Charlie Baker, the Republican candidate, because I said, "Oh, you live in Massachusetts, you're involved in politics. Ergo, here's this web ad." So, and I guess it's like just shows that it's kind of very imprecise. But I mean, it's like usually I'll just brush it aside, but I'm usually just surprised that it pops up. I'm not sure that if that's happened to anybody else.
Do you guys list your political affiliations on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that at all?
I myself don't explicitly list it, but I guess if you look through things that I retweet or people that I follow or whatever, I guess certain things I say on Facebook, you would be able to determine my affiliation, or at least which way I lean.
Nope,
okay.
My affiliation.
I don't list my affiliation, I list my ideology, which is social democratic. So it's just me personally. So like, I guess it's just, I think that's more informative than just simply a party label.
That makes sense. And I guess a question for you guys, since a lot of you guys are poli-sci, Do you think your non-poli-sci friends keep up with politics at all, or do you feel like they don't really know what's going on and you're kind of having to explain stuff to them? For the two poli-sci guys.
I would say that at least in a college environment, everyone's kind of at least knowledgeable about big events that are going on. But as far as actually getting into issues, not very many people who are not poli-sci majors will be willing to, I guess, have in-depth conversations about it.
That makes sense. Sorry, someone's asking me about joining. Getting a lot of requests in. And then I guess also, Adam, if you want to answer kind of what you think people are.
I mean, I went to the University of Chicago, and I'm not sure if you've heard like the jokes about it, but like we're all known for being very nerdy. So it's like usually everyone, even if they're not a poli-sci major, like at least from from where I went to school, will have like some idea of what's going on, like especially since David Axelrod started his new Institute of Politics there. So, but like we're a very, very special case. So like I would not say that we're at all representative of most people. I mean, I could be wrong. It's just that's my impression.
Oh, and Jonathan just joined the group. So, hey, Jonathan, if you want to go ahead and like introduce yourself, talk about where you went to school, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Sure. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
Right.
Sorry, I had some trouble. I thought that I knew how to use Google Hangouts, but apparently I didn't for the past 10 minutes. I was just watching you all. So I finally got in. My name is Jonathan Davis. I attended Texas Christian University, graduated last year with political science and psychology. Originally, I am from Montreal, Canada. What else? What other information do we need? Currently I work for Tarrant County government and educational outreach. Tarrant County is Fort Worth County government, and I'm a program director there. So thank you all for having me.
Great. And one of the first questions I asked everybody, just kind of circle back for a second, was how do you keep up with your news?
With my news, I'm probably not a very good millennial in many ways because I think I just reacted. It was very interesting when you sent me the message on Facebook. That was the first time I'd gotten on Facebook in about 6 months. So I don't use Facebook and I don't use Twitter. My news, I kind of get, I select, like I use just different media sources individually. So I don't really use social media as far as obtaining my news, at least not in the past 6 to 9 months. Kind of gone on a hiatus from that, but I just use particular news sources for how I would obtain those.
And what kind of news sources do you tend to rely on?
I use a pretty good variety. I observe most of the major media outlets. I don't take them all with the same consideration. As well as some of your Politico, Gawker for Technology, etc. I use a pretty wide variety of media outlets.
Okay, cool. And kind of moving on to a different question, I was going to ask you guys, did you always have kind of like the political beliefs that you have now, or do you think to some extent it was a function of how you were raised or how you grew up, or do you think you changed over time while you were in college? Kind of if you guys have something you want to like chime in or say about that.
My political views have changed over time. My views aren't necessarily the same as my parents were. A lot of it just had to do with political theory and economic theory that I've read.
Anyone else?
I'm kind of a strange case. I mean, it's I guess like generally I've always been left-leaning, but I guess like my views have kind of gotten more refined as and over time as time has gone on, I've learned more about the issues. So like I've generally been roughly in the same place, just I guess I've added more substance to my views. But I guess for me, what's so strange is that it's funny. I mean, I actually have finding myself having more in common with my grandparents and my parents. I mean, it's like my grandparents were both union organizers. They were in the United States and Canada. I'm actually half Torontonian, so to Jonathan, great to see another Canadian online. But yeah, we just had a very interesting election up in Toronto. But yeah, so
always exciting in Toronto.
Yeah, we're free from Ford Nation. Anyways, so I guess it's like I don't know. I guess I kind of like inherited. I guess like a kind of social democratic, labor-based political viewpoint kind of skipped a generation over to me. Maybe it was just because of the kind of books I read, or maybe like the environment I grew up in. I mean, for me, it was like having to see the contrast between like my cousins in Canada with like their cheap college and free healthcare versus our situation kind of influenced my direction. So, and again, I'm kind of a strange case in that case.
So, I guess this is sort of related to that, kind of not. But for you guys, do you feel like, what do you kind of think of Obama's performance the past couple of years? What is your kind of opinion on recent events? Things like ISIS, Ebola. We're dealing with a lot of kind of like major national and world crises right now. So kind of what is your opinion on the president's performance?
Pretty poor. He came in on a platform saying that he was going to end a lot of our involvement militarily in the Middle East, and he's only furthered a lot of our involvement. His use of drones in killing people, even an American citizen, without warrants, all of that being considered, I would say his performance is pretty poor.
And part of the reason I'm asking this, the poll that was released, Obama was considered, among millennials, it was kind of a whole new low in terms of how many millennials supported his performance. So I was curious kind of what you guys thought about that. Anyone else want to chime in on what you think?
I mean, I suppose, like, on the whole, there are some, Obama has some accomplishments that he can be proud of, I think. Obamacare, for all of it, the mess, for how complicated it is, starting to show some real results with, increasing the rate of the insured, getting people are now getting access to health insurance that they previously were not able to afford. I think with Dodd-Frank, you now see the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is finally starting to really kick into high gear, and I think that's sort of solved some issues with our economic crisis. But so, and again, like, I think history in that regard will ultimately be kind to him. That being said, Obama came in with with the potential of being something of a transformational president, of someone who would sort of like maybe like FDR or JFK before him, someone who could sort of really harness the energies of the American people and really get people excited about getting involved in the political process once again. Yet, as president, he's really governed in a very like aloof, technocratic manner that has, I guess, it's hard to really put this into words, but I guess that has really disillusioned and disenchanted a lot of people, and I guess squandered the mandate that he had when he came in 2008. I mean, part of this isn't all of his fault. Some of it's the way Congress works. I mean, especially with the frequent use of the filibuster. That being said, let's just say, like, I guess in short, while Obama has accomplished some measures that he can be proud of, in the end, I don't think the actual accomplishments measure up to, at least to the expectations that his presidency began with.
I think overall, Obama has performed as would a president in his circumstance. I think one of the reasons why it's so polarizing for him right now is just based on the initial ideal of change, especially transformational change, coming over from President Bush, which for many, if not most liberals, considered to be one of the worst presidents. I definitely won't go that far, but for those liberal-leaning believed that this was supposed to be the transformational presidency, with that consideration as a decline, and then an upheaval with President Obama. And where most of that polarization comes from, I think, is the fact that presidents really don't have, I mean, just for the American public, considering that the American public politics altogether, as far as like the very, outside of the fundamental nature of politics, it's that presidents really don't have as much power as people think. Kind of going over to Adam, is that your name correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of going over to Adam was saying is that Congress has a lot more control than the President of the United States as far as what bills are being passed and what's going on and what affects, especially in particular, states. And when people started to see that we came over from what many consider to be a quote-unquote bad president to a president that can't really initiate the changes that he's promised. Many of those things, Guantanamo Bay is still open. As Adam stated, not Adam. Someone else stated that many of these wars are still going on, or more wars now than we were in the past. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that largely it's not the president of the United States that makes those choices. NATO and the U.S. Armed Forces has a little bit more control than we'd like to think, and even alternatively, there's a lot of political ideals and conceptualization that we can't understand outside of the scope of the President of the United States. And there's just so many things that the President just doesn't have control over, no matter who he is, no matter if he comes in and says he's going to change the world and change all these kinds of policies. I would say, yeah, I mean, that's the most I can say is that the president has performed as you would think someone in this circumstance, coming over from a two-term president, kind of in the declining, especially those past 2 or 3 years, in the declining president, and in such a polarizing phase.
I was going to say, going back to something both of you mentioned Congress. And I was kind of curious. So we're talking about, filibusters. We're talking. Obviously, I think there's a perception among millennials that there's a political gridlock in Washington. And so, from you guys' perspective, is there a side? Is there a political party that should be blamed for this? Should everyone be blamed? Is it a broken system? What do you think?
I think blame lies on both sides. Because the way the system is designed, there's supposed to be consensus for the government for the government to be able to work. People have to give either way, and it seems that in the current climate, no one is willing to do that. You can say that conservatives aren't willing to give on anything that Democrats are pursuing, but it's likewise from the other side. So blame does fall on both.
I do agree it takes, as they say, it takes two to tango in that regard. So, I'm sure, you can blame both sides to a certain degree. That being said, I think, one thing that's really been going on the Republican side or the right wing is that they've essentially moved so far to the right that it's like they're basically being seen as outside the mainstream. A lot of the positions that they're championing now, such as, abolishing, the Department of Education, Energy, Commerce, or as well as, slashing basically rolling back the entirety of the New Deal, the Great Society, or even most of the achievements of the Progressive Era. These were positions that were considered unthinkable just a few decades, just like a decade ago. Don't forget it was. It was a Republican who first opposed the DREAM Act, cap and trade, all these various other issues, and now all of a sudden it's like the center is just being pulled so far to the right that even though at least at least back when the Democrats were in control of Congress, you still had enough blue dog Democrats that could have served as like wheelers and dealers. There's no more. There aren't really like enough Republican equivalents of blue dog Democrats, so to speak, to really forge a compromise or forge a consensus. So in that regard, it's like, yes, our political system operates on consensus. That being said, I mean, how far are you willing to let one side just completely have one side's extreme wing completely just dictate the agenda? So I mean, it's kind of complicated. I think a lot of it deals with like how just far to the right the center has moved. Oh, I've made myself clear.
No, you did. Robert, what do you think?
So Adam, what you view as the defining points between the right and the left? So where do the right and the left differ ideologically, in your opinion?
Like, I guess in a general sense, I mean, like you would say that. I guess like on a purely theoretical sense, you would say that like the left generally, is for more government involvement in the economy, but less involvement in maybe social or personal issues, whereas with the right's flipped. That being said, at least for many years, at least for many decades, even under Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, you've had at least some overlap insofar as it was saying, well, okay, maybe say one side wanted, like at least like example when I said like that, a Republican proposed I think it was a Republican who proposed the cap and trade plan. It's like there was enough consensus to agree that the issue of global warming and climate change was a problem. The issue the differences was how to really deal with that. It was whether or not we want like a direct government intervention, or we want a more market-based system, which was what climate change, which is what cap and trade was. So it's like there was enough consensus, at least, between the left and the right, up until recent years, on like what the problems that this country was facing. But now it's almost as if like the left and the right are living in completely separate worlds. So it's like, even though like there are like definite philosophical differences, there should at least be enough sense of both sides to realize, at least to agree, what problems this country is facing, so to speak.
I guess an example of that I can think of, to jump in for a second, would be immigration. I think both sides this year agreed that something needed to be done with the immigration system, but the ideas on both sides differed so much that we couldn't really kind of reach a consensus. What do you guys see? What would you wish that your representatives would do? How would you hope that they would handle it in the future so that they can kind of like fix this issue?
The issue of immigration?
Immigration?
No, not immigration. Just like this whole concept of like a political gridlock, beyond just like compromising. Is there something that you wish that they would do, or do you think that there's something that needs to happen to kind of fix this problem?
I think there's too much focus on the individual topics that people miss the greater ideologies behind these different statements. So rather than focus on what are the ideas behind this statement or that statement, they're just picking different hot topics. So what is the idea behind healthcare in terms of the size and scope of the government? What is the idea behind our involvement in the Middle East in terms of the size and scope of the government? Because from my perspective, I don't really see an ideological difference between the right and the left. Both favor expanding the size and scope of the government. It's just where do they want to expand it. So I see no real difference between the right and the left. They're just wanting to expand the government one direction or another. But ideologically, both are perfectly all right with expanding the size and scope of the government.
Thoughts, anybody?
Does anybody else want to go? Or?
You can go, Adam.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess part of it in terms of gridlock, I guess, at least this is like in terms of gridlock or the functioning of the American political system is that our system not only is it built to facilitate consensus, it's built to discourage the whole idea of party discipline, meaning that like you have instances where you have like where it's like Boehner can't even control his own caucus in the House because he has to deal with the Tea Party rebels, even though he's nominally like the leader of the Republicans in the House. Meanwhile, like back in the early part of the decade, you had issues with blue dog Democrats trying to, I guess, essentially undermine, like, let's say, the president's agenda on healthcare or financial regulation. So, and granted, like, I'm not saying that, like those voices shouldn't be heard. It's just that the lack of party discipline, like in America's political system, as compared to, let's say, like a more parliamentary system, it sometimes makes like political calculations difficult when it comes to like passing legislation, because you have to, party leaders can't really just crack the whip and the members will fall in line. I mean, there's no institutional basis for that, at least not anymore. So now it makes, like, unless that institutional basis can be built, then it makes, I guess, legislative calculations very difficult. Because, like, especially in the Senate, where you have where you can have like instances such as like mechanisms such as secret holds or other parliamentary techniques that can stall legislation.
Yeah, and I think everyone now is going to Washington. Every politician is going to Washington and with the mind that they want to win. And this gets back to the heart of the issue of compromise. You have someone like Ted Cruz who shuts down the entire government just because he doesn't want the debt ceiling raised. And that can't happen when you have people unwilling to cede on anything at all. They just want a 100% victory or nothing.
And what else was I going to ask you? So somebody mentioned the Tea Party. What do you guys think of the Tea Party? There was kind of a question of a specific question.
I had to get out for a second. You mind if I digress for 1 second?
Yes.
Before we jump over, I think what I think a lot of the reason is for this polarization, and I hope I'm not off topic because I missed like the last 60 seconds. But I think a lot of the reason for this polarization between the parties has little to do with the ideological beliefs and concerns, and a lot more to do with outside interference. One largely to do with Citizens v. United. But even outside of Citizens v. United, the kind of outside influence of corporations, this is on both sides, not just the Republican side, but Democrats and Republicans, has largely expanded the level for which there's likely to be compromise. And I think in many different ways, I'm trying to think the best way to put this, considering where I work, I think in a lot of different ways that this influence is superseding the likelihood for which, particularly Congress, but I would say any government official, it's superseding the ways in which they're likely to compromise over the issues which they would have 20 years ago for the exact same issues. And since we have so many of these political this political action, these PACs and super PACs, and that they're garnering so much influence and so much power that it makes it just so unwavering for many politicians to act on the same compromises which they would have otherwise. And I think that, in my opinion, I think that's probably the largest reason why we've seen this, especially in the past 15 years, to why these parties are moving further and further away. Ideologically, they're really not moving much further than they were in '98. It's just the likelihood for which they're actually going to make these compromises, not what the compromises are for. That's my opinion. That's my theory.
So you guys, what do you think about, so is campaign finance reform, would that solve part of the problem? Do you think campaign finance is like a huge issue related to kind of effectiveness in Congress and I guess with other political figures?
I think it would help, but the core issue is that we're trying to fit political parties into a system where political parties were not designed for. I mean, our government was not set up with the idea of having political parties. And the fact that political parties have risen and then have gotten so much power is where I think a lot of the gridlock comes from. And so, you know, reform will help, but it's not going to fix the issue.
I think it will contribute a great deal. It won't be a silver bullet or a magic bullet of any kind, but I mean, like I know from working on various campaigns and also from reading about the subject that it's like as the campaigns have gotten more expensive and as campaign finance restrictions have been eroded, you're basically seeing more and more politicians spend more and more of their time dialing for donors or chasing after money. Not that this wasn't an issue before, but now that now that politics has just become so expensive, it's becoming even more of a time suck. That time that could be used to attend to the needs of constituents or learn more about the issues, and it's also forcing politicians to increasingly listen to an increasingly tiny sector of the population. I mean, most major donors are by nature not representative of the majority of Americans. They mostly come from a particular socioeconomic background, and so that perspective, if it's that one perspective that a politician's going to be listening to over and over again when they're trying to dial for donors, it's going to influence the outlook that they're going to have on the issues and on various political topics. That being said, I think that while campaign finance reform would help in that it would potentially give, at least lessen the influence of outside corporate interests, and I think it's also like another thing that could help would be at least some sort of public financing system for campaigns. It's like in New York, which I was reading during their mayoral election. One of the reasons Bill de Blasio even had a chance to run a progressive campaign was that, in spite of Wall Street has a big influence over New York City politics, but the fact that he was able to rely on a system that matched small donors, his campaign allowed him to sort of run against that tide. So that's like a reform I think would definitely help. That being said, given that, I think the other issue besides campaign finance reform has to be increasing voter turnout, because turnout is vastly skewed towards, currently as at this point, people who are more likely to turn out are people who are more affluent, more stable economically. Ergo, even if you got rid of money in politics, you would still, unless turnout becomes more representative or higher and much more encompassing of America's population as a whole, you'll probably still not, the priorities of the politicians in D.C. or anywhere for that matter will still not align with those of the American people. Unless voter turnout expands.
So, kind of turning to a different question now. During that poll, one of the questions they asked millennial voters was what they thought the most important issue facing America is, and I was curious what you guys think is the most important issue. And also, kind of tagging along with that, who do you trust most? You can say party-wise, you can say candidate-wise if you have somebody in mind that you think is good. Who do you trust most to kind of fix this problem or to handle it?
This issue.
I've rambled long enough, so I'm going last.
If you think about it, income inequality is obviously ever present in a capitalist system, but if you look at the level to which it has gone in the last couple of years, it's insane, and you're starting to see all types of problems just arise from it. And I think in the coming generation or so, it's an issue where the problems arise slowly, so it's not as evident now as it will be in the next couple of years, but it's definitely one of the biggest issues facing our generation. And I guess to say who I trust more, I mean, we've already established that the president is not as powerful as we all would like to think the president is. And so to say that any one candidate, any one president is going to be able to fix an issue is not just possible. So it has to come from a multitude of people, a general consensus about focusing on an issue and figuring out a way to solve it. So yeah.
States' rights versus the federal government's. I think that's the biggest issue for me. Where does the power lie, with the states or with the federal government?
Okay. Who else? Jonathan?
Jonathan?
Why me?
I said I'd go last.
That's fine. Well, since you called it, I guess it works that way. I was thinking. I don't know what the biggest issue, but one of the biggest issues for the United States is income inequality, yes, and just wealth disparity in general. But I would say even especially educational disparity, which kind of goes within the same realm as wealth disparity. I think for the first time, is it last year? Maybe last year or the year before, we reached nationally 80% graduation rate for the United States, which is definitely better than most of the world, and it's slightly below average for developed countries. But when you think about the fact that typically those graduation rates, which lead to many, many more things that would carry this conversation on a lot longer than it needs to be, is typically the way that it operates is that your school has about 99% graduation rate or a 40 or 50% graduation rate. And in many areas, if y'all are familiar with like dropout factories, which are schools that have graduation rates of 40% or less, those are not only your highest crime, but highest violence, highest in pretty much any negative statistical category that you can think of. And those areas have the lowest economic indicators, the lowest political index indicators, and just leading to so much disparity that really goes on and carries out throughout the rest of the United States, which I think for many communities that are able to ignore it, those areas that are closer to the 99%, by 99%, I'm talking about like actual graduation rate, that it's felt as if it's not affected because we just kind of look at statistics in general. We don't see so much like the variation rates and all those kinds of things. Most people aren't really concerned with it, but the education disparity in the United States, and particularly for developed countries, is one of the widest gaps, really, in the entire world, to where we have some schools that accrue millions of dollars, and others that accrue to just tens of thousands for 2, 3, 4 times the population. And it affects our workforce and our economy, and in many ways, eventually, just our foreign relations in every capacity that we can think of. I think it's one of the things that aren't talked about enough in the way that it should. We just kind of see it generally as it is. Graduation rate's 80%, awesome, good, 80% across the board. We don't really see the disparity for what that counts for.
Yeah, I guess for me, well, I mean, economic inequality, yes. I mean, that's been talked about a lot, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But the only thing I would add is that I think one issue of economic inequality that doesn't get related to economic inequality that does not at least get discussed enough is really as you could say, is rebalancing the power between labor and capital. I mean, it's like you've seen, not only, as I said before, like the center of the political spectrum has been shifting to the right, but you're also seeing, like, in terms of political power and economic power, the balance between organized labor and business has been, like, shifted so sharply to that of business and business interests, so that essentially, like in the past, like organized labor was like the one major, at least one of the major forces in American politics that would advocate for like a expansive welfare state or for a sort of a more, I guess, priorities that would directly affect the poor and working class. However, because their numbers are shrinking through increased union busting tactics or cutbacks to the public sector, the decline of American manufacturing, you're seeing like the political power between labor and business just become completely one-sided. The one issue I think that, apart from economic inequality, like the one issue I think that that is extremely important, at least for our generation, that isn't that no one's mentioned so far, I think would be climate change, given that I guess like the whole, like that issue alone has like the potential to completely change the way that we all live and change like the very nature, or at least living habits of our entire species, so to speak. In terms of like, as we said before, no one person can impact or at least change the entire political system from root and branch. One person I think who at least is pushing for something in that direction, I know I'm kind of biased because like I work for her, but I mean, you're seeing Senator Elizabeth Warren already sponsoring bills with Republicans like Orrin Hatch on aids for children with disabilities, or with John McCain to reinstate Glass-Steagall, or I think she did also sponsor something with Tom Covert about like good governance. So I think she is like sending I think by these actions she is sending a signal to a lot of those on the left that you can be true to your convictions and be bona fide progressive while still finding common ground with those who disagree with you to get things done. So I think hopefully, that was like the same example that Ted Kennedy set while he was in the Senate. So hopefully that example will sort of, at least it'll send a message to the bases of both parties, so to speak. Plus, I think on social media, she's already shifting the conversation. Like, I mean, you're seeing like her Senate hearings go viral, and she's like enforcing financial regulations, so issues that previously were never discussed. So there are some problems. She's not going to like completely change the system from the ground up, but one person can at least make a difference to a certain degree.
And was there something that I didn't ask you guys about that you think that you'd want to like touch on or go back to, or I guess also a question, I'm not sure if you guys have a different answer for this from my previous question, but I was curious if there was an issue that you think is maybe not viewed as important by, it's not typically in the spotlight or specifically important to Congress, or a hot button issue for everybody, but something that's important specifically for 18 to 29-year-olds or to our age group. Do you think that there is an issue that is not being addressed enough that is something that specifically concerns 18 to 29-year-olds? Could be no. I was just curious.
This may seem like a relatively small issue in the grand scheme of things, but perhaps like the proliferation of unpaid internships. But no, like I'm serious in that it's like the fact that politics is relying like more and more on unpaid interns. It's making it like I've sort of seen this before, like in the jobs like I've worked at an intern for, like the demographics of people who are able to spend a summer without pay is just extremely limited, to the point at which like it's closing off opportunities in our political system and a lot of other areas. So perhaps if finding some way to pay interns, I suppose.
You are absolutely right. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen.
We can hope, but
like at least the White House should pay their interns, or like members of Congress. I mean, I know Bernie Sanders pays his interns like $10 an hour, but
they should vote on it. Let's see where that vote goes.
Kind of going back to one of those, it's something sort of similar to that. Student loans, how big of an issue do you guys think that is? The cost of college. I feel like that's kind of one of the youth vote issues that actually does come up in the news enough. So I was curious kind of what you guys think about that. If you think it's a big issue. I know you mentioned Elizabeth Warren. She sponsored a bill about student loans making college more affordable. So I was curious if you guys' thought on that. Is college too expensive?
That actually really is, I think, one of the largest issues today when I really think about it, because the fact that post-secondary education, as far as being affordable, is something that's becoming more and more out of scope every single year because the rates are exceeding inflation at a rate that is just becoming absolutely unfathomable. I remember just before I attended TCU, my father doesn't understand a whole lot about college or anything, but the only thing he remembers is that my uncle went to a state school in Texas in the 70s. And so to him, he thinks school still costs $300 a semester. And so when I went to TCU, which, is a private school, he gave me, what does he give me? He gave me $150. He said, hopefully this will last you the first couple of months. And I remember that was about the cost of my biology book, a used biology book, and just considering, I don't know if y'all have had the chance to kind of look at just the scale to which it's increased versus inflation. So basically, the rate for which it's actually literally affordable.
Yeah, saw that.
Yeah, it's I can't even it's so hard to really to understand just from how it's been since I think the mid 70s, the early 70s, mid 70s, and where it's going for the next 20 years. It's becoming a point to where only certain classes, I mean, it kind of always has been to some capacity to where only certain classes could afford it, but it's becoming to a point to where only your highest political, social, and economic class can actually afford to go to college, outside of those that are fortunate enough to gain scholarships. But those rates are also now exceeding the levels for which colleges are considering to provide for scholarships, because your room and board are exceeding to levels that are beyond acceptance, and then your tuition is already through the roof. Um, it's just making it so much more difficult for this conceptualization of the American dream to have any type of validity to it, if only X number of people are actually able to afford it. There was a point just 30, 40 years ago to where you could pay off all 4 years in college, at least at the state school, just with the money that you had, and not even having a very good job, making the equivalent of today's $30,000-$40,000 a year. You could pay off at least 2 years in about 1 year's time. But now it's getting to the point where for state schools, for those people with the average national median income of about $50,000, where those are getting closer to $8, $9, $10,000, to where it's not, it's just becoming incomprehensible to be able to afford to go to college. And then you have graduate and professional degrees, which are on a different level in and of itself. But that's definitely one of the biggest issues today as well.
I think too many people are going to college today. When you try to make everybody go to college, then a college degree today is what a high school diploma was 20 years ago. And so you make it the new minimum requirement. Whereas if people are going to college just to get a degree so they can get a job, I mean, most jobs out there don't require a 4-year college degree. And I think that we're hurting a lot of people by forcing them to go to a 4-year program and getting themselves into a lot of debt. I think that colleges and universities are expanding their program too much to accommodate more people going in. That's why we have so many more degrees nowadays that didn't exist 20 years ago. So I think we're doing a lot of harm by making a college degree the new minimum standard.
Yeah. I mean,
Jonathan, you disagree?
I don't know how I feel. I do know how I feel about that. I think that. Well, I don't think. I believe that I think it's kind of dangerous to say that too many people are attending college because as you said that it's becoming the minimum requirement, and considering that graduation rates pre 1975 were pretty close to 90%, and if this is the minimum requirement and far less than 50% of the population are reaching this minimum requirement, it's very obvious that it's necessary. And if it's necessary and it can't be afforded, and you say it's the minimum requirement, there's very obviously a problem if we can't reach this minimum requirement today. And there's very few, for those that don't have the political and social connections to be able to obtain employment through whether it's family businesses or connections without having a degree, your options are infant. They're so minimal that it's difficult to consider. You're outside of your kind of retail and restaurant and restaurant management, etc. You don't have very many options with only a high school diploma if you don't have that social and political capital. So for the vast majority of the U.S. population, without that degree, an associate's or a bachelor's degree, you're essentially destined for poverty. And that leads to far more concerns than the fact that the minimum requirement is the bachelor's degree. And I agree with that. The minimum requirement is the bachelor's degree. But if that's the minimum requirement and that's not being obtained, then there's obviously a very big problem.
But why is that the minimum requirement now? It's only the minimum requirement because we've pushed so many people into getting a college degree. That wasn't the case 20 to 30 years ago. And so
Well, see, it always was the
minimum requirement beforehand.
Yeah, it always was the minimum requirement for people who were looking to go on to these really successful careers. And what has been happening is it's just opened the door for people, for a lot more people, to be able to get to these types of careers, the next level. And so when we say that it's dangerous for people it's dangerous that a lot more people are going to college, I believe that it's so much better that we've opened the door for.
But you said it opened the door for these more successful careers. Are there more of those careers out there, or just more people for those careers?
I think it's pretty much basic economics. I remember I was talking to someone the other day, and they're talking about if we raised everyone's income by 20% or 10% or whatever the case may be, everybody would be better off. When everyone who knows anything about economics knows that's absolutely not true, because then all prices would raise that exact same proportion. So obviously nothing would change. Now, what's happened since the 60s, 60s and 70s, is that more and more and more people are going to get degrees. And therefore, those requirements are going to go along with the more people that are getting these degrees. So we had a time where only a very small percentage of people were going to get bachelor's degrees, and it was around 10, 15%. We're getting closer to 20, 30% of people that are getting bachelor's degrees, and therefore those organizations are raising their requirements. And as they raise their requirements, it makes it difficult for those people 20, 30 years ago who would have, just with a high school diploma, been able to get these relatively decent, paying jobs, $30,000, $40,000 a year coming in, to be able to obtain them. And now we're at a point where there's very few organizations that will take you outside of organizations such as B2B, sales, selling, well, mostly pretty much sales and retail. There's very few opportunities for people that don't have those degrees, who again don't have social and political connections. If your family, go ahead.
You made my point right there, because you said the only reason why this problem exists is because more people are getting college degrees today.
Mm-hmm.
You said that 20 years ago you could have gotten a good job without a college degree. But it's only because we've pushed so many more people into college that it's harder for those people without a degree.
Right. We also have a significantly more educated workforce in the U.S. population as a result. So I wouldn't go as far to say, as far as technology, that's why we've advanced as far as we have. And although overall, in many respects, the United States isn't quite as powerful as it was, we are definitely significantly more advanced than we were at the time. So I think on a microeconomic scale, I would agree with you that it can be a problem, but that's only given certain sections of society. So for the sections of society that have always had bachelor's degree, that have always had master's and doctorate degree, I suppose it would be concerning for them that there's more access for everyone else to be able to do it. But given that these people are shackled in debt anyway, they don't have too much to concern themselves with if we're talking on that scale. But it's definitely a positive thing that there's more, not quite equal access, but there's more access for the general population to obtain these degrees, and that the degrees have expanded beyond your professional, your business, and your law and medical. I definitely wouldn't consider that a problem.
Well, I think that there is a middle ground to be found here. I think that the issue, in terms of like the amount of people who are going to college, I think it relies on rethinking the definition of higher education as a whole. Like in the United States, like we're one of the only countries in which higher education really equals like a university degree. If you look at, you know, how other countries handle this, especially Germany, it's like you have, when they talk about higher education, they have multiple tracks. There's like the university track, there's a sort of then there's like a more technical track, which involves like a part-time apprenticeship and a part-time technical school that, you know, is considered like just as good as the college as a university degree. So in that regard, I mean, like obviously we can't become like Germany overnight. That being said, I think that the lessons that we can take from other countries is that perhaps at the very least, like, rethink the channels of higher education and try to see, you know, could we find something or create some sort of program that is just as, that could prepare people for a successful life without, even if they're without going through, let's say, the financial burden of a college degree. Obviously, this won't apply for all professions. I mean, I think for more liberal arts professions or those related like to law or poli-sci or sort of like related to the social sciences or humanities, like that track is not available. But let's say more technical professions, perhaps that could be an option worth looking at. I know that I remember reading this one article how German businesses were now being set up in being set up in South Carolina, like forging partnerships with community colleges, and to sort of set up like a similar system of what they had in Germany. And just to get back to the whole issue of like the cost of education, it's not just the cost of four-year colleges, but community colleges, at least here in Massachusetts, are some of the most expensive in the nation. And I think it's like, at what point does like education become priced out? Because, certainly, I know here in this state, like because it's Boston. I mean, we have can't count the number of colleges we have, so like it is going to be a big issue like in the upcoming election. But at least for a state that doesn't have like as many colleges or college students, it may be somewhat less of an issue.
And so, I mean, we're kind of kept you guys kind of here for a while, but if there's something that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to touch on, or a previous issue that kind of we talked about that you might have had something else to say, but kind of got cut off in the process. Anything anybody else wants to add before we kind of close out? So I guess like thank you guys so much for kind of coming out and doing this, giving it a shot. Good opportunity to kind of hear what different people in different places are thinking about politics. And thank you guys all for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.